Protests erupted across Venezuela Monday, shortly after sitting President Nicolas Maduro was declared winner in a disputed election.
I came to the street. We want freedom. We're tired of this government.
Yesterday, crowds came out onto the streets in cities and towns across Venezuela.
Hello everyone, welcome to our podcast, episode 3. Typically, in Fellow International Student channel, we only post about jobs, career, and also settling down in high-paying opportunities, and we bring in industry leaders who have settled down in Canada. However, in this particular podcast, we're going to take a complete shift and talk about a different topic. Today, we have our guest speaker, Anna Karina, who actually migrated from Venezuela as an international student. And she established herself very well in this country. Currently, she started a political journey and running multiple organizations which advocating rights of women as well as people who went through challenges. In this podcast, Anna Karina is going to explain the geopolitical situations, the economic catastrophe happening in Venezuela, and what are some of the lessons the Canadian government and other big countries can learn from Venezuela. So that way, they are not doing the same mistakes. I hope you enjoy this podcast and share it with the people whom you please.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? Ana Karina, how are you?
Hi, Arjun. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to be in your podcast.
Amazing, amazing. We are privileged to have you as a guest speaker today. I know that your story and your journey is going to inspire a lot of people, and it's going to tell the story of your country.
Yes, exactly. So it is a very interesting journey now that you mentioned that. I moved to Canada as an international student in 2016, and I started a program in Seneca College about international business management. So I already came with a law degree from my country, that is Venezuela. And then I started a career here, and that was a connection to also expand a career in banking. Okay. And later on follow my passion, which is related to politics and nonprofit.
Awesome, Anna. I know, I've seen you coming as an international student and studying in Seneca College itself. And I'm pretty sure that this journey has made you as a better person overall.
Absolutely. It's especially very important about the connections that we make. Connections like you, for example, many friends. And also it's about using the tools that you get in the college as well.
Amazing, Anna. So, I know the whole goal of this particular podcast is to tell the audience what is happening in Venezuela, right? It's been in very interesting times from past 5 to 6 years or even maybe 10 years. Frankly speaking, until I met you in person, maybe 5-6 years back, I did not know that there's a country called Venezuela and the crisis, what it had to go through and whatnot. Maybe you wanna share a little bit on what is happening in Venezuela as an overall perspective, right? Not the current issues, what is happening in the Venezuela. And maybe you also want to talk about some current issues, what's happening in Venezuela right now.
Well, Venezuela has been in a very problematic situation since I moved to Canada and even before that. So one of the main reasons why I had to move to Canada is because my country was already going through economic turmoil. And that means that we had a lot of problems when it comes to food resources, hyperinflation, the minimum wage was already very low back then. Even working as a lawyer, I couldn't make enough money to survive. I had to rely on the help that I would get from my parents, or I had to live a very limited life. Even something like buying a pair of jeans was considered a luxury in my country back in the day. And it still is like this nowadays. So it is a very problematic situation of economic downfall, what Venezuela experienced. So in this case, in a scenario, I had to move to Canada. I had to start a new life here. I originally moved as an international student, which was very challenging because, as we know, international students, you had to put a lot of money into your education to start a new life in Canada and all that. But overall, it was worth it. So right now, the situation in Venezuela is that we have a socialist government that has been, well, it's more than a government, it's a regime. It's very interesting to put emphasis on that, because this is a regime that started in 1998, and basically Venezuela hasn't had a different political party ruling over the country ever since. We had Hugo Chavez during many years, and after Hugo Chavez died, he pretty much decided to have a successor, which he designated himself, like, oh, I'm dying, so you should vote for this person, which is the current dictator that we have, Nicolas Maduro. So when you think about it, Venezuela went from this guy to his successor, so it's basically the same line of government since 1998, which is not how a democratic government should work. So the current situation in Venezuela sparked on July 28th because after massive electoral process where a lot of people went to vote, the government committed fraud. They haven't shown the electoral receipts. They haven't backed up their claim of victory. They haven't shown any indication that they actually won. They just basically took the electoral commission of the country, which is very politicized and controlled by the government itself, and say, oh, we won, and that's it. And that sparked protests, and that sparked a lot of people going in the street massively to protest, like what you saw in Bangladesh not so long ago, for example. Massive protests, and then the government started to beat people in the street. We have more than 1,200 political prisoners right now.
Oh my God.
I think there are more since July 28, and we have more than 22 protesters that have died because of government very much killing them. So that's what we're having right now.
Yeah, really unfortunate to hear that. And right now in the global economy, it is very much important for us to know what is happening in the different countries, because typically people think, you know what, something is happening somewhere, so I don't have to bother. So how does it matter to me? And if you're not aware, if you're not educated, and if you don't know what's happening in the other countries, it might happen to your country.
And you're a professor in international business,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So something that we learn in international business is that when you are gonna do business abroad, you need to also study the political landscape and economic landscape of a country. So imagine that you have someone interested in doing business in a country like Venezuela,
Correct.
and you don't have any knowledge of what is happening there. It will be a disaster.
Exactly. I'm also teaching a subject called international business cultures. So it has a lot to know about what's happening in different countries. And that's one of the biggest goal of today's podcast, is because being in Toronto or being in Canada, you tend to meet a diverse set of people.
Exactly.
Right?
Absolutely.
You're from a Spanish country, Venezuela. I'm from an Asian country. Our norms are different. Our education is different. Our belief system is different. How can we bridge the gap between my cultural differences versus your cultural differences, so that way we can work with each other? That's the goal, right?
Exactly. No, and this is an interesting way of doing it, because it's about learning, like, how are things going there? Like, why are people angry? Like, how does affect? Because that's the interesting part, right? Like, we're living in Canada. Canada is a country that is part of the Americas, same as Venezuela. So when you think about Venezuela and the problem that they have, is not only a problem that is happening there. No, it's a regional problem.
Yeah.
Because Venezuela, just as Canada, is a member of the Organization of American States. Like, whatever decision they take is an influence. And actually, right now, the largest refugee crisis, or most of crossers that you have in the U.S. border, are actually coming from Venezuela, coming all the way from South America and crossing Central America.
Yeah, that sums up, because sitting in Canada, if you think, oh, I don't have to care about what's happening in Venezuela, somebody's knocking your door, because, like, people are migrating. Like,
exactly. In the end of the day, they are migrating. And I don't know if you remember this time where the mayor of New York City says something like, oh, we can welcome all these immigrants. And then what he did is that he certainly welcomed a lot of these immigrants. Many of them were Venezuelans. And then he put those immigrants in buses and sent them to Quebec, to the border in Quebec.
Oh, wow.
That happened not so long ago. And many of these immigrants, the vast majority, were Venezuelans.
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty interesting to know about it. Awesome. So, there is a starting point for every crisis, right, Anna? Because, all countries are good. all people are good, nobody want to create mess and whatnot. But when do you think this particular economic catastrophe got started in Venezuela? What are the some turning key points and whatnot?
I think we started to experience the turning key points back in 2011, actually. So it's been more than 10 years
10
now.
years.
And the reason how it started is because of different economic policies and decisions that were taken by the Chavez government back in the day. Let's remember that in Venezuela, they expropriated massively businesses. Like, there are actually videos of the former president going in the street and pointing out on national TV, expropriate this business, expropriate this business, expropriate. And what is expropriating? In these cases, the government will take over these businesses that were working in the private sector.
Okay.
And in some cases, he wouldn't even provide proper compensation to the people that were losing their business. And what happened is that many of these businesses that were successful in the past, they started to go bankrupt because he put people in place to run them, not because they knew about how to run a business, but because of political loyalty. So in the end of the day, many of these businesses went bankrupt.
Okay.
That obviously affect your system of production. And I'm not talking about, 10 companies or 10 businesses. I'm talking about thousands. He did that to thousands of our productive businesses. So there is that. Another case, you have the fact that they started printing money. So if you don't have any backup to what the money you're printing, you end up developing inflation in the future.
That's right.
And also we have the fact that they started to impose price controls. So it was a process of, I affect the system of production. That is going to cause a scarcity. And what is the law of the offer and demand? If you have a scarcity, all these products that you have that are going to be less of what you had are going to increase in price.
Agreed.
So the way that he did to manage the price increase is imposing price controls.
Okay, sure.
And why is Arjun gonna sell the bread when the bread is not profitable for Arjun?
Agreed.
You decide not to sell anything.
I'll stop doing the business.
And stop doing the business, which is gonna worsen the crisis. So all these economic decisions led to a situation where we end up going in the supermarket and there was no bread, there was no butter, there was no milk, and we had to line up to many hours. Like, some people will start lining up from the night before in order to access to a supermarket if they knew that there were certain products. So just as you use WhatsApp right now, there were group chats back in the day telling you, oh, in this supermarket you can find milk, oh, in this other supermarket you can find butter. And then you go there, you line up for like about 3, 6, even 10 hours just to buy these products, which is insane, because that's not a life worth living. Let's be realistic.
And how is the life right now in Venezuela?
Right now, now you find these products, but the economy, even though it's not officially under American dollars, you basically spend American dollars when you travel to Venezuela. Like, I actually traveled last December and I was able to see it myself. Now I cannot go because, talking about Venezuela now puts me in a very difficult spot. But back in the day, I could see and pay everywhere with American dollars. So everyone in Venezuela is basically now using American dollars as a form of currency. Like the banknotes, that's what they use. But the problem is that only a percentage of the population can actually make good money in American dollars. Most of the population, like my parents or many members of my family, they cannot really afford a very decent lifestyle over there. Like in my case, because I can help my family, like my parents at least, my sister does that too. But regular people just making money in the local currency, they cannot afford a life.
And this situations kind of spark a place where the crime goes up, right? When there is no stability and there's no security, people tend to rob or maybe so on and so forth. Maybe you want to share what's happening in terms of the crime scenario there, how people are able to live, how difficult it is to live.
Yeah. Well, Venezuela has a lot of unrest, political unrest. It has also a lot of political impunity, impunity in general. And the way that it is right now is very interesting. It used to be more unsafe in the past. Because what happened is that Venezuela, especially during the years like 2016 and 2018, reached such a bad and dire situation that even criminals started to leave the country. Because, of course, what you want to do if you're a criminal is that if I'm gonna go and let's say rob Arjun, I want Arjun to have a very expensive phone. I want Arjun to have a very expensive necklace. I want Arjun to have a very expensive, I don't know, shoes. But if the entire population or the vast majority of the population is living below the poverty line, who are you going to rob? Exactly.
Even robbers lost their job.
Even robbers lost their job or their industry, let's say, which is ridiculous.
It's no more profitable.
Yeah, it's no more profitable. So, like many of them, unfortunately, started to also move to other countries, which also created problems for Venezuelans that started to move because then it started to increase xenophobia in these countries as well. Because it's like, oh, Venezuelans are criminals, but it's not like all Venezuelans are criminals. It's like a very tiny minority that unfortunately get the bad word to other immigrants.
And that's the same everywhere. The 1% of the population defames the 99% of the population.
Exactly, which is a tragedy.
And the country gets a tag.
That's correct. That's correct. And that's honestly what sparks a lot of like unjust situation for immigrants in everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, like, very unfortunate to see how a country which was beautiful, which was wonderful, right? Because, and I assume that maybe first 10, 15 years of your life, you're happy, you're enjoying in Venezuela, one of the beautiful countries to live in, etc., etc. And then you saw the things, how it turned out after the crisis.
Yeah.
Before the crisis, after the crisis, you witnessed both of it. So maybe you want to share your thoughts. How was the country before all of these things, right? Like, I know right now Venezuela in a bad situation, but do you want to share how it was before the situation?
Well, the thing about Venezuela, and this is the part that honestly makes me sad, is that unfortunately when I was born, a few years later, like in 1998, we already start to have this government. So even though I saw a period of prosperity, like I could see that myself, it was only like in a brief time of my childhood, because later on what I saw was a lot of political tension. I saw my dad, for example, being fired of his job because he decided to vote in a referendum against the president, which is a democratic right, but they blacklisted everyone and persecution started. I saw political prisoners on national TV getting attacked. I saw people protesting in the street. Like, that was my childhood as well. So even though economically we were not as bad, we already started to see our civil rights getting attacked slowly, Like, I remember being on the TV and see how one of the main Venezuelan TV channels got shut down just because the president couldn't handle criticism from journalism. So that's censorship. And that's one of my first memories of, like, this is bad, this guy is bad. And unfortunately, I just saw like everything going downhill. So Venezuela in the past, even before I was born, I remember reading in history books and also like meeting immigrants in Venezuela. They used to say like, I moved to Venezuela because Venezuela was the land of prosperity back in the day. Venezuela was one of the most stable countries in Latin America. Venezuela is the wealthiest oil nation.
Oil rich.
Exactly. So it was literally like a country where oil meant prosperity, and that was seen in the overall situation. Of course, you will find poor people, middle class people, just like everywhere you will find equality, but it wasn't as much as it is now. So it is a very ironic perspective, because when the socialist government arrived, they arrived with these ideas of equality. We're going to make everyone equal. In the end, they made everyone equally poor, unless you're aligned with the government.
Yeah. So, like, talking about the prosperity, right? Like, Venezuela is oil rich. And, like, I somewhere read, correct me if I'm wrong, like Venezuela has almost equal or more oil than Iraq and Iran and Saudi and whatnot. So why are they not extracting the oil?
Well, the reason is also related to the government. The government nationalized the oil company, and they imposed like a lot of like they use it, the oil company, for political reasons. So the oil company nowadays, they didn't reinvest in the infrastructure, in the process of extracting oil in the refineries. And we're talking about refineries that in the past were like top level in Latin America. Nowadays, they don't respect any protocol regarding environmental issues. We're usually having oil spill in our the Caribbean beaches. It's a tragedy. And not only that, the amount of barrels of oil has consistently reduced compared to how it was in the past. So they use the company mostly for political reasons, and that means I steal the money if I'm a local politician, corruption, or I use this money in order to promote campaigns or give handouts to people to get them to vote for me. So they use their oil company for that reason. And it's the government, they don't care. They, in the end of the day, if you have a business, you care about your business. But if that business doesn't really belongs to you as an individual, then you don't care as much. And that's what we see in Venezuela.
Makes sense. And I love the way the conversation going, by the way. We're getting into a deep conversation here. And maybe you want to share your thoughts on any involvement of US government in all these things, because if US says don't buy the oil from Venezuela, people don't buy it. And there was oil, and if everybody were able to buy the oil effectively, maybe you don't have to be in Canada. You would be happily living in Venezuela, rich, wealthy, prosperous, and whatnot. Maybe you want to share any thoughts about, do you think there was any involvement of US government in this crisis or in the economic catastrophe?
Well, actually, the US was probably our most important trading partner. So actually, the US was this country that used to purchase many of all barrels and pay in cash. So the relation between Venezuelans and the US was actually one of prosperity, because I give you something, you pay for it.
Agreed.
And the problem, actually, more than the US, I would say that right now is the same government that destroyed our infrastructure when it comes to the refineries. They didn't reinvest in infrastructure, as I mentioned, and also the relationship with Cuba. So my government started to have a very close relationship with the Fidel Castro regime in the island, and Cuba receives, even nowadays, barrels and barrels of oil, and I'm talking about hundreds per month for free. Completely free. They don't pay. The reason is because in exchange, the Cubans are the one providing counterintelligence service to track down the opposition and guarantee oppression and control of the government in my country. So overall, the US sanctions, they have imposed sanctions on Venezuela. But it has been mostly to designated entities. So Venezuela, they could have also provided this oil to many people, and that's what Venezuela used to do in the past. But even that, and I want to make a very clear statement about this. When Venezuelans started to have the issues that I mentioned back in 2011, that we already started to see the scarcity of food and products, Venezuela didn't have a single sanction from the US. Like, the oil company wasn't doing that great back in the day. So let's imagine an hypothetical scenario where the US lifts all these sanctions, which, by the way, they actually relaxed the sanctions not so long ago. Actually, I think the agreement was signed up either this year or last year, and it was between Biden and Maduro. And the way that Biden stated is the US is gonna relax these sanctions for you to export oil, but in exchange, you need to have democratic elections. So when you have elections, you have to respect the results. And they did not. They actually didn't care. So now that's another thing. Venezuela right now is going to face a lot of sanctions, and not only from the US. Other Latin American countries are already moving their embassies. They don't want to have any relationship because no one wants to have a relation with a tyranny. So it is unfortunate, and that's why Venezuelans are still fighting back. Recognize the results. Let us have democracy again, because no one wants to be in the position of Iran or North Korea or any of these countries that is isolated from the democratic world. So that's the reality.
Yeah. I mean, like, thanks for painting in clear picture about what's happening, how it got started, and like, what contribution US is doing to this particular crisis and whatnot. Great, Anna. Thank you very much.
Venezuela was once the richest country in Latin America. It has the largest known oil reserves in the world, and its democratic government was once praised worldwide. But today, Venezuela's democratic institutions and its economy are in shambles. The country has the highest inflation rate in the world, making food and medicine inaccessible to most Venezuelans. Over the last 4 years, its GDP has fallen 35%, which is a sharper drop than the one seen during the Great Depression in the US. And the country's murder rate has surpassed that of the most dangerous cities in the world.
Anna, I love the way the conversation is going on. You shared a lot of information about what's happening in the country and whatnot, in your country, Venezuela. And now that you are in Canada, and it's been more than 5 years you've been in Canada, and I've seen your international student journey. You came as an international student, you really climbed up the corporate ladder, you got some phenomenal jobs in one of the biggest banks in Canada, and now you're pursuing your political journey, right? Like, what prompted you to get into politics, and how is the journey going on so far?
Well, more than, I think that the main point is that I was always like very passionate over like what can I do to promote a change. So, for example, in my case, I haven't been like involving directly with the government yet, but I believe a lot in political advocacy. So, for example, like one of the ways that I did it is by creating the Ladies of Liberty Alliance chapter in Canada. So we are a chapter-based organization. We are in more than 43 countries.
Lovely.
We actually have chapters in India as
Amazing.
well.
Okay.
And I lead the chapter in Canada nationwide.
Lovely.
And it was a very spectacular journey because it started in only 2021. So that's not so long ago.
Sure.
And we have chapters in Toronto, in Ottawa, in Calgary, and in Vancouver is the most recent one. So the way that we started, it was a very tiny chapter in Toronto that after the trucker protest took place in Canada, which was like very very controversial situation. I remember that even the Americans started to pay attention to Canadian politics, and they were like, what is going on in Canada? Why is Canada allowing all these lockdowns and restrictions? Like what is happening with Canadians? And then they saw the massive protest that took place in Ottawa, especially. And I live in Ottawa. So I could see myself what was going on. I actually participated in some of the protests. And since that moment, I got the direction from the team in Washington, D.C., like, maybe it's time for Lola Toronto to stop being Lola Toronto and actually start taking the national stand of Lola Canada. So ever since, I have been getting more and more engaged with politics. I have invited members of parliament to speak in events for Lola.
Lovely.
We're actually going to have the wife of Pierre Poilievre joining an event in Ottawa as well with us.
Awesome.
So, yes, we have participated in the Canada Strong and Free Network, that is the biggest conference for conservative politicians. And, it has been very inspirational because we don't have an organization like this in Canada.
That's right.
That is catering only for women with this type of political thinking. So that is something that I've been working on, and I'm very proud of that.
Amazing. And what is the goal of your organization?
The goal of my organization is to empower women in the libertarian and conservative movement. So what we want is women that are not waiting for the government or the state to solve their problems, but that are actually proactive in a community of women and learn how to spread the ideas of liberty and understand that the power needs to be through action. So community actions is what really empower. Entrepreneurship is what really empower. The government dictating you what to do or what not is not what is empowering, because in the end of the day, most of politicians, let's be realistic, are men. So that's usually how it goes. And it's a matter of thinking of, minimum government. Don't take so much of my money in taxation. Don't put bureaucratic barriers for me to become an entrepreneur. Like, make doing business more simple. And that's something that we promote in Lola.
Amazing.
Among other things.
Yeah, great initiative, and I hope that it's going the right direction. And I see the passion in you, and you're heading with conviction and passion, and I hope you are able to hit the goals what you're looking for.
And something that we focus, since we're chapter based, is to also focus on local problems. So that means, for example, from Canada, we cannot say what the problems that a woman is facing in India is going to be like. Or, for example, I cannot say what the problem that women are facing are gonna be like. Like, one of the examples of Venezuela right now is that one of our chapter leaders was arrested on August 6th by the Maduro government while she was just advocating for political rights. Like, she was just participating in the campaign on the opposition. She was denouncing publicly on social media about the unrest and the arbitrary detentions that were taking place. And that night she was a victim. Like, that night someone entered from the counterintelligence service, broke into her house without any warrant, without any judicial order, and they took her, and now she's in the torture center. Venezuela has the largest torture center in Latin America, and that's where they have my friend. They haven't shown any picture of her. They haven't shown any proof of life right now. They just told the lawyer that, by the way, it's only the private legal advisor, because the government is the one assigning you a lawyer that obviously is not going to take care of you.
Exactly.
And they are like, that's her situation right now. We don't know how they have her. We don't know how she is. And the other members of Lola in Venezuela are hiding. They cannot even post anything on social media because they can be persecuted, they can be arrested, they can face the same
treatment.
Yeah, the same treatment, exactly.
Yeah, sorry to hear that. And when was the last time you went to Venezuela?
It was December last year.
Last year. How hard it is to go back because you're advocating rights and whatnot.
Exactly. Yeah, so essentially it's like a very risky situation, because the moment you enter the country, and I saw that when I went back last year, they took my ID, they went to a little tiny office, and they started to research me. The good thing is that, of course, back in the day, I was more vocal about Canadian politics and stuff.
Right.
So what they found were not really Venezuelan government related.
That's right.
So they didn't care as much. But right now, just the past interviews that I have provided, I've been also quoted in Quebec media, I have been quoted in media in the US. Like, there's now information about
there's a lot of visibility about you on the social media on this topic.
Exactly.
Where they can easily catch you the moment you enter the country.
Exactly. And if they capture me, it's gonna be same face as my friend, which is unfortunate that it's happening. And I don't want to be in that situation, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to really hear that, and I hope the situation gets better. And I know you're fighting from here. Maybe you want to share your thoughts. How are you able to fight being in Canada about what's happening back home?
Well, you have seen my social media. You see how much I share information about it. And that's the thing, because in Venezuela right now, people are so scared because it's a state of terror. So if they take your phone, oh, look, Arjun, he posted this on Instagram, and they don't matter. It doesn't matter if it's an Instagram post. They are gonna tell you, you want to go to prison, like to the torture center or something like that, or you want to pay me 5,000 American dollars.
Wow.
So extortion is a new normal. So people in Venezuela, many of them are not taking the risk of posting anything. What we are doing in the diaspora is that we are sending letters contacting local politicians to please, condemn the Maduro regime, take diplomatic actions against the Maduro regime, recognize the person that actually won, that is Edmundo Gonzalez. Please also taking actions like protesting in the street from time to time, because obviously people are busy, unfortunately. And, also reaching out to the media, spaces like this where we can discuss things like that. And that's what we do. Even our social media, telling what people are suffering, that is a way, because otherwise they're going to be silenced completely. because they cannot expose themselves when you are inside the country.
You are the messenger
Being
being in the country where people don't know the truth.
Exactly.
And people who are already in the country have no ability to convey the truth.
Exactly.
And
like one of my cousins sent me a message one day, like, please, can you share what is going on in the country? Because many of my friends are not sharing anything. And she's living in the country. And for her, it's sometimes difficult to get the news because most of her friends that live inside are not sharing anything either. So she tells me, I'm finding out through the Venezuelans that live abroad what is happening here.
Do you have any message for the Venezuelan diaspora where people are there, who went through the same kind of challenges, but they're in Canada right now? Maybe they're forgetting what's happening back home because they're selfish and they're just thinking about themselves. Do you have a message for them?
Honestly, I have barely met any Venezuelan with that description. Most of Venezuelans, we have our mind here and our heart is over there. So we are suffering as a community.
So you see everybody are fighting and everywhere, united for the same cause.
Yeah, absolutely. We want freedom. That's the reason why many of us had to leave.
Anna, I know that you were working as a product manager, right? You were in administration, you were in IT, you were in banking altogether.
Anti-money laundering.
Anti-money laundering, working in downtown with a Starbucks coffee, with an Apple laptop, enjoying your life. You let that go and you choose a path of hardship, right? You choose a path of uncertainty, right? Uncertainty in income, uncertainty in job security, or uncertainty in your schedule. And it's not like a 9 to 5 gig is what you're selected. So what is your political ambition as you go forward for?
My political ambition right now is focused on expanding my organization. So what I want is to have presence of the Ladies of Liberty Alliance in every province in Canada and even the Northern Territory, if possible. And what we want is to, in the future, create a new generation of Canadian women who will be not only engaged in politics, but in, political activism, civic action, a woman who would like to also pursue an entrepreneurship path are more than welcome as well, because that's what we promote. We promote prosperity. And we want this woman who will promote the good ideas that will make this country a better place. Because in the end, you cannot build a country without women. And that is part of my political ambition. One part of that, maybe in the future, running for member of parliament.
Absolutely.
We will see about that, but yes.
Absolutely, why not?
Yeah.
And do you want to share how women, in this country want to be a part of your organization or want to involve into the things what you're doing? Is there a website for you guys, or is there a upcoming networking events which is happening where
Absolutely.
they can take part of?
Actually, one of the networking events, and that's the reason why I'm in Toronto, is going to take place tomorrow in the city. But it's also this event is one of them. We're also going to have another event on Sunday that is a shooting event. So we also believe in self-defense.
Shooting, not
shooting with actual guns, my friend. Because we believe in self-defense in this organization. Actually, we have provided self-defense classes to women as well, because that's part of the empowerment. You don't want to be in a situation where, as a woman especially, because we are vulnerable, let's be real. You don't want to be in a situation where you are forced to use a gun to defend yourself, or when you had to fight to defend yourself. But if you ever find in that situation, it's better to know it, to have the skills at least.
No, very interesting. The moment you said shooting, I thought it's another podcast shoot, but I didn't know that.
No.
Real guns.
Real guns, that's right.
Is it only for women or even men?
It's only for women.
If not, I would have joined you as
but
well.
Your wife is invited.
Yes, I can bring my wife for sure. Awesome, Anna. That's great. I'm glad that there are a lot of activities happening. And guys, I'm gonna tag Anna's Instagram and LinkedIn and all the websites in the YouTube description. And if you're a person who always believes in women's rights and women's empowerment, and you want to be part of an organization which is going in that direction, feel free to reach out to her, and she'll be more than happy to help you guys out.
Exactly. We are open, and we would like to have more women joining this movement. That's what we promote. Liberty-minded women who love their freedoms.
Amazing, Anna. I'm surprised that we are almost at the end of the podcast. We covered a lot of information. I know it's a little bit of a longer podcast, but there's so much of information, right? Because right now, if you see whatever Anna mentioned, it is not just a content, it is an emotion. It is her life is what she actually displayed openly and sharing what is happening in her country. Because you can take yourself out of the country, but you can't take the country out of you.
Exactly, because we are always gonna have that little piece. It's our culture. It's in our idiosyncrasy.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
that's how it goes.
Absolutely, Anna. And now that we are in Canada, do you wanna share any thoughts about what Canadian government can learn from the crisis or the case study what they have seen in the Venezuelan economy right now?
I think that what we can learn, like there are two lessons. I don't believe that politicians or governments really learn, because one thing is what politicians are when they're on campaign. One thing is when they arrive to power. So what I believe is that what we as Canadians can learn is that a person that remain in power for too long, they get too comfortable. So that's why rotation in the government, change of government from time to time is essential to democracy. Because who is the government? You don't knock the door, hey government, open the door for me. No, it's someone that is in that government, an individual, a human being like you or like me in the end of the day, that they can get power hungry because they get used to that influence, they get used to that power, and if you let them run for so long, why are they want to leave? Like you are already in a comfortable spot yourself.
So that's the message. Like you think that the government should keep changing.
Yes.
Are you mentioning just leaders should change, or even the political party should change?
Obviously, political parties as well. We need change because the problem is that in the case of Canada, for example, we have had 9 years of Justin Trudeau already. He's not changing the leadership of the Liberal Party, so it remains the same. Like, if you are happy with the situation of Canada right now, which many Canadians are really not, let's be realistic.
Absolutely.
If you keep voting for the same guy, they are not going to provide different results because it's the same party. What he didn't do in 9 years of government, he's not going to do it.
Agreed.
Like, we need to be realistic. And that's not only in Canada, that's the way governments work. So are you going to keep an employee that hasn't worked for you in 9 years? No, like that's way too long. Actually, you replace that person
in 6 months.
Exactly, in 6 months you got it. So I think that's why it's essential for democracy to have a certain period, and that's it. Like, for example, I like the system of the US in that sense because they allow only 2 periods, and after that you cannot put yourself in there. You cannot be reelected. But in Canada, since it's a parliamentary monarchy, the system is different, and we have this guy that, imagine if he gets reelected, like he's gonna be like 14 years or like that's insane.
Maybe the new water tax is gonna come. Now we are doing the carbon tax.
The rain tax. Remember? Yes, exactly. You get it.
If it rains, you gotta pay the tax.
Oh my God! Imagine they're taxing a gift from God.
Yeah, exactly. And last but not least, any message to Canadian voters, because we have the election coming up in less than a year, maybe in a year, if I'm not wrong.
It's 2025.
Yeah, any message to the Canadian people?
It's the same message that I provide. Like, consider your options. Consider, like, don't fall into like, because in TikTok they say this, or in Twitter they say this. Read, inform yourself. If you have time, at least read the bills briefly. Like, try to see what is actually happening. Make informed decisions. And like I said, like, if this government hasn't worked in these many years, I highly doubt they're gonna take any different direction. Like the carbon tax is an example. The capital gains tax is another example. Healthcare, like they're not doing any healthcare reform that is really beneficial as well. Even in Ontario, we should head in a different direction when it comes to healthcare. So we need to think about different alternatives and make informed decisions when it comes to voting, because that's what is going to impact our lives. Unfortunately, government decisions, they impact every individual's life.
Anna, I mean, wealth of information. There's so much of content, so much of emotion. I can only feel empathetic with the situation, what's happening back home. And I hope this podcast is gonna really help, unravel the secrets or maybe the hidden truths, what's happening in the country. And every citizen is empowered to take the right decision. Because in a democratic society, we have only one right, which is vote. Right?
Exactly.
Vote is the only power we have, and when we use it effectively, no leader can become an unstoppable force.
Exactly. That is very important. And fortunately, we don't live in Venezuela. We don't want this country to head into that direction. So use your right to vote.
Absolutely, Anna. Last but not least, do you want to share any last message to your Spanish friends in Spanish? So like in any sort of message, it might be about your country or maybe anything you want to share.
Muchas gracias por ver este podcast. Si lo has visto, por favor, mantengamos la fe. Venezuela va a ser libre. Es hasta el final.